What's going on, everybody? Cleopus Tech here, coming back at you with another video. In this video, I'm going to be giving you my first impressions of the Motorola Razr 2023. Now, despite being a slightly higher end phone from Motorola, at this point in late 2023, with all the deals and promotions going on, it's actually getting to be surprisingly affordable. So I'm going to be going over my initial thoughts about it to give you a better idea of what you can expect if you get it. Now, as always, if you end up wanting to learn more about this phone, definitely check out the description where we'll be linking to several other videos about it, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But with that being said, let's get into it. So with the Motorola Razr 2023, we're getting a really large 6.9-inch 144Hz POLED display with a 1080p resolution, a PPI of 413, and a 22:9 aspect ratio. So definitely a great display here. And as you may or may not know about this phone, it does also have a pretty unique folding design. Now, of course, there are other phones like this, but definitely not something you see every day. And while I personally feel like I wouldn't really find myself using it that often, if you are looking for something a bit more compact, but you do also want a really nice large display too, then this is definitely a great compromise. And now, when it comes to this design, there are lots of other features and settings for it, which I am going to be going over in other videos. But essentially, just keep in mind, this is a foldable phone, so if you are looking for something with more of a unique design like this, then this could be a good thing for you. But back to the main display itself. At 6.9 inches, of course, we are getting a really large display here. So if you're doing a lot of stuff on your phone, whether it's more simple stuff like reading or browsing the web, or maybe you're consuming a lot of content like videos, games, or just simply looking at photos, regardless, with a larger display like this, you will get a great experience. And not only are we getting a really large display here, but with the 22:9 aspect ratio, we're getting a really tall and narrow form factor. So if you're doing something in landscape mode, like watching a video, for example, you're going to get a much more immersive experience. And then if you're doing something like reading, with a form factor like this, you can fit plenty of content on the screen without having to scroll too much. Aside from the size and dimensions, the image quality is great here too, with a POLED display compared to something like an IPS LCD, for example, that you might find in more of a budget phone like the Moto G stylus. With this kind of display technology, things tend to be a bit brighter, the colors are a bit more vibrant, and the viewing angles are a lot better. So if you're maybe outside in the sun, for example, or really in any kind of bright area, this phone will be a bit easier to see. So in general, if you're looking for a phone that has a really nice display, you definitely won't be disappointed with this phone. Now for the storage, with the Razr 2023, we are getting 128GB of internal storage, so definitely a pretty good amount of storage here. For the average user, you probably won't need more than this, so if you're really just doing normal stuff, then I wouldn't worry about it. But also keep in mind, unfortunately with this phone, we're not getting microSD card expansion, so if that is more of an important feature for you, definitely keep this in mind. Now, again, on one hand, with 128GB of internal storage, I feel like for most people, this is really not going to be a big deal. But at the same time, maybe your current phone already does have a microSD card and you have all your files and information on it. Transferring everything onto a phone that doesn't have microSD card expansion is probably not going to be the most convenient thing to have to do. So if you are in that kind of situation, then you might be a little disappointed here. But otherwise, if it's really just about storage and you don't currently use a microSD card anyway, then despite this phone, like pretty much every higher end phone, not having microSD card expansion, I do think most people will be okay here. Now for security features, with this phone, we are getting Face Unlock, so definitely nice there. And it also has a fingerprint scanner right here on the power key. So real quick, let's give it a try. There we go, one more time. And there we go. So as you can see, real fast and responsive. And again, we are getting Face Unlock too, so if you want to use that instead, you always can. Now taking a look at the camera setup here, with the Motorola Razr 2023, up front, we got a real nice looking hole punch design for the selfie camera. This camera is 32 megapixels. Then on the back, we got a dual camera setup with a 64 megapixel main camera and an 8 megapixel ultra wide camera that also doubles as a macro camera. So definitely a really Motorola thing to do. I haven't actually seen any non-Motorola phone like this, but just keep in mind, despite only having a dual camera setup, again, it does have both an ultra wide camera and a macro camera, in addition to a high quality main camera. So definitely a great camera setup all around. And when it comes to general features, there's really not a whole lot this camera setup can't do. The only thing it's kind of missing is a telephoto lens, which even when it comes to higher end devices like this, definitely not all of them have one. But again, aside from that, we are getting plenty of features here. And while considering this is a first impressions video and I opened the phone like 20 minutes ago, I haven't personally used the camera yet, just going off of more budget Motorola phones like the Moto G Stylus 5G, for example. As it is, that phone already took really good photos. So with with the Razr, considering this is a much higher end device than that, I am expecting the photo quality here to be really good. In addition to this, when it comes to video, this phone can record 4K videos at 30 frames per second in both the rear and front cameras, and 1080p at 60 frames per second. So in general, if you're taking lots of pictures and recording lots of videos, I do think this phone will be a solid option. Now for the RAM and processor, with this phone, we're getting 8GB of RAM with the Qualcomm Snapdragon 7 Gen 1 processor. Now when it comes to overall performance, I haven't done really a whole lot with this phone yet, but I will say, considering this is more of a higher end device, for most people it will get the job done. I mean, no matter what you're doing, if you're doing stuff like browsing the web, using social media, watching YouTube videos or streaming stuff, that kind of activity really doesn't take that much processing power anyway, so if that's all you do, then you won't have to worry at all. And even if you're on your phone a bit more doing stuff like high performance mobile gaming and things like that, despite maybe not being as fast as like the Razr Plus or a Samsung Galaxy S23 Ultra or an iPhone or anything like that, compared to your average budget phone, the Razr 2023 will still be on a noticeably different level. So if you are looking for something that on one hand is a bit more affordable, but on the other hand is still going to give you a higher end experience when it comes to performance, then I really don't think you'll be disappointed here. Now I ran a benchmark test on this phone using Geekbench 6, and here are the results I got. Now what I recommend doing is running this test on your current phone, and then comparing your results to these, and that'll give you a better idea of where this phone stands performance-wise compared to your current device, because depending on what you're coming from, it may or may not really be an upgrade. If you're coming from something like, say, an older iPhone for example, or a Samsung Galaxy S20 or something, then chances are it's going to be around a similar level, and even compared to something like the Samsung Galaxy A54 5G, or the Motorola Moto G Stylus 5G 2023, on one hand compared to those, this phone is still going to be a little bit faster, and you will notice a bit of a difference. But if you're looking for like a night and day kind of difference, then you will probably want to get something higher end than this, like again maybe like the Razr Plus. From what I've heard, that phone is quite a bit faster. But yeah, if you're really just looking for a phone under $600 that's still going to give you more or less a flagship level experience, then again, I do think the performance we're getting here will be perfectly fine. Now for the battery, with the Razr 2023, we're getting a 4200 mAh battery that supports 30-watt fast charging and 5-watt wireless charging as well. Now, 5-watt wireless charging is really not that impressive, but I've only really put it on a wireless charger for like 5 seconds to make sure it actually works. So when it comes to wireless charging, I don't know from experience yet whether or not the actual charging speed is really that bad. But I will say when it comes to the regular fast charging, 30-watt fast charging is pretty good. But really my main complaint here is with a 4200 mAh battery. I mean, on one hand, this is really not terrible, but at the same time, Motorola phones nowadays are just known, I feel like, for having really good batteries. If you look at something like the Motorola Moto G Power, for example, even that phone being honestly a really low-end phone compared to this, that phone still has a 5000 mAh battery and really impressive battery life. Whereas with this phone being a $600 phone that's definitely approaching the actual flagship level, we're only getting 4200 mAh, so it is a little disappointing, but I will say I'm just gonna assume here, in order to get this slim design that folds in half, I'm sure they had to make some sacrifices, so I'm assuming that's why it's a bit smaller, but just keep in mind if you're really looking for the best battery life, this phone is probably not going to be it. But at the same time, I mean, again, I've only had this phone for like less than an hour at this point, so I really don't know what the actual battery life is going to feel like. But I'm assuming that with a 4200 mAh battery, just knowing Motorola does typically make good batteries, it should be at least alright. But again, if you really want to maximize your battery life, you can do better. Now for the software, this phone does have Android 13, so definitely not bad. But considering we're going into Android 14 at this point, if you really want the latest version of Android as it comes out, then you might end up being disappointed here. And the reason I say this is because considering this is a higher end device, I'm sure it will eventually get Android 14, but when it comes to Motorola compared to something like Samsung or Google, for example, the updates are a little bit less predictable and more inconsistent. So if you really are looking for something that has the greatest software support, then for a phone like this, you might want to go with something like the Samsung Galaxy S21 or S23 FE, or maybe a Google Pixel phone of some sort. But if it's not really that big a deal to you, then just keep in mind, Motorola's software is typically pretty good, so I'm expecting it won't really be an issue. When it comes to other features, keep in mind this phone does have NFC, so if you like to use tap and pay, you won't have to worry about that. And taking a look at the overall design, again, definitely a nice slim design despite it having a really large display. And of course, since it folds in half, having a large display really doesn't come with any drawbacks because, I mean, this is smaller than pretty much any phone that exists. But then of course when you open it all the way up, it's going to be this giant display. So you're really getting the best of both worlds here. In addition to this, not only is this more of a higher end device, but it actually does feel like one. It has a decent amount of weight to it. We got a nice aluminum frame here. And the back is made of apparently some kind of vegan leather. It honestly feels like silicone or something to me, but according to Motorola's website, that's what it is. So regardless, it does feel nice. And again, the phone does have a good amount of weight to it, the build quality is good, and despite having more moving parts than your average phone, it still feels pretty solid. But in conclusion, my overall first impressions of the Motorola Razr 2023. Now in general, is this the perfect phone? Honestly, from my first impressions so far, not really. There are some things that leave a bit more to be desired, like again, the battery. I do understand that probably the only reason it has a slightly smaller battery is because they did have to do something to make it able to flip like this, but still with a 4200 mAh battery, if you're really using your phone a lot throughout the day, maybe you're traveling and not always able to plug it in. Sure, it does have wireless charging, so getting a battery pack is an option, but considering the wireless charging is really not that great at 5 watts, that may not be the best solution. So just keep in mind, again, if battery life is really that important to you, then you might be disappointed. In addition to this, the performance, while definitely not being bad at all, and being much better than your average mid-range phone, compared to other phones like the Samsung Galaxy S23 FE for example, it's not nearly as fast. So if you're gonna spend $600 on a phone, just keep in mind, chances are you could do a little better. And in addition to this, even though 128 gigabytes of internal storage is again probably going to be fine for most people, since it doesn't have microSD card expansion, it would have been nice to see 256 instead. But aside from that, also keep in mind that despite going for around $600 full price, you can find some pretty good deals for this phone. I mean, I got this phone from Cricket for like $200, $275 after all the fees and taxes and everything. So in general, if you're looking for an affordable device that's still going to give you more of a higher end experience, then I do think this phone is worth considering. But this concludes my first impressions video of the Motorola Razr 2023. Again, if you want to learn more about it, although this is my first video about it, I will be making plenty of others in the future. So if you want to see those, definitely check out the description because I will be linking to them there, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it and found it useful, be sure to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to follow Kalipis Tech on Twitter and Instagram. And as always, I will see you in the next video.